The average admissions officer is probably not who you think they are. And I say this because there's a lot of mystique around who an admissions officer actually is. Because surely the gatekeeper to one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, surely this person is some sort of mythical, godlike person, right? Let me tell you that the average admissions officer is pretty darn normal. Starting with their pay, usually students think that these people make hundreds of thousands of dollars every single year, right? Because they have such an important role. But the average admission officer's salary in 2026 is $54,000. Not that much. Better yet, if that admissions officer is entry level, meaning they've just started off their job, they're probably looking around $38,000 to $40,000. So again, not that much. This is not much more than a minimum wage job. However, it is true that on the higher end, a lot of admissions officers are actually breaking six figures, but not by much. The numbers I'm seeing points to this being around the cap that most people late in their admissions officer career tend to make. Moving on to education, most admissions officers have a bachelor degree, which kind of makes sense because if you're the gatekeeper to college, you probably should have gone to college. But when it comes to higher education and a postgraduate degree, only 18% of them seem to have one. It is very common for admissions officers to actually be an admissions officer at the school that they attended because they know it the most intimately. Here's the wildest stat about being an admissions officer. About 71% of admissions officers will eventually leave their role after 3 years of working in the field. What this means is that the job of an admissions officer is a very high turnover job, which means that the average person who's reading your essay right now is somewhere in their 20s to 30s, freshly graduated, who's doing this for a couple of years before they move on to their next role. So when you paint the picture of who the average admissions officer is, there's someone in their 20s or 30s who's recently graduated from college, maybe working on their master's degree, who gets paid about $50,000 a year, who's on their fourth coffee in the middle of the day, spending no more than 10 minutes reading your application. Now that's quite the picture. While it's definitely true that the dean of admissions and maybe people who are higher up on that ladder have definitely been doing this for like a decade or so, you gotta know that the average person who's reading your essay isn't so out of touch as you think. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to be human and relatable and honest when it comes to your essays because someone who's no older than I am is the one who's reading your essays. When you put all these things together, you realize that your admissions officer is a human being, not an algorithm. They're underpaid, they're overworked, and they're probably not going to be in this position for very long. This is one of the reasons why I always give this advice that you have to be real, you have to be human, you have to show your impact, and you got to be genuine. Be unique, because at the end of the day, an admissions officer is not going to be impressed with a textbook level response. These are people who read thousands of essays. They're looking for a reason to be inspired and to believe in you. They're not looking for perfection, they're looking for a connection.